Hey there, my name is Emma. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm an artist and DIYer, and today I'll be sharing 3 different tutorials on how to make gifts for the plant lovers in your life. I'm 25, I'm a millennial. I know Gen Zers are also really into plants. There is just this huge houseplant craze going on right now. Pretty much all of my friends are into houseplants. My sister's into houseplants, so I figured I would give a specific video just for plant-related DIYs for those plant lovers in your life. I know the holidays are coming up, so I thought this would be the perfect time to share this. I am constantly doing plant-related DIYs. I have a ton on my TikTok. In fact, I think there's an entire playlist dedicated to them. So if you want to see more content that's related to plants, head over to my TikTok. I'll link it below. And let's jump right in. The first one is a propagation station. And if you don't know what that is, it is a place where you can store water that you put cuttings of plants in that allows them to grow roots. I've actually done a bunch of different types of propagation stations on my TikTok. Now for this one, I do wish I got bigger test tubes than the ones you'll see in this video. I ordered them off of Amazon, and yes, I did measure, and in my mind, it was like 3.5 inches. That seemed like enough, and it very much was not enough. So if I were to do this one again, I would definitely get bigger test tubes. But I'm sure if you have a plant lover in your life, they're always propagating plants, and you can even include some cuttings of plants you have if you do have them. This one you can get totally creative and do your own thing with. I painted a design on the back. You can do whatever you want, but here is a general idea of how I did this propagation station. I found these signs at the dollar store, and I knew they were perfect. This one said "Believe" on the back. I just cut the tag off and started sketching out. Now at this point, I really didn't know what I was going to do. And in a second here, you'll see the moment that I realized this idea was not going well. So I ended up scratching whatever I was doing at the beginning and going for a blind contour drawing. That's pretty much just a fancy way of saying I drew a bunch of squiggly lines all over. Theoretically, you're not supposed to be looking while you're doing this, but I wanted to make sure I was filling the space appropriately. So I took my Sharpie, did all those squiggly lines, and started to paint in certain parts of the shape with the color palette that I wanted to work with. Now, you do not have to do this painting technique. This was just kind of something fun and bright I wanted to do. You can paint it however you want it. You can paint it plain, but this is what I did, and I ended up going over with some more black lines and adding a few extra black lines. I then got these super strong magnets on Amazon, and I did spray paint them metallic gold. I prefer gold. I don't know if this ended up being the best idea. If you do end up doing that, make sure they dry all the way and you're using enough glue, because once I finished, I did have a few of them that kind of popped off and peeled off the paint. So maybe ixnay on the gold paint part, but I just used E6000 to glue them on. They stuck to the board really, really well, and the ones that did stick stuck to the glass really well. I absolutely love how it turned out. I think it's such a fun, bright pop of color. With the exception of needing bigger test tubes, I think it turned out perfectly, and I would be so happy to receive this. And again, you can paint this different colors. You can also do it the opposite orientation. You can do whatever you want. As I was saying, make sure you let the paint dry before adding the glue. I think that's where I went wrong. I always rushed through my DIYs, and I didn't let my paint dry for more than maybe 5 minutes before I added the glue. And there were a few of them where when I went to take off the glass, the whole thing came off the magnet because it was not properly dried. So you can either not do the gold at all. It doesn't make a huge difference anyway, because theoretically the roots are going to be covering it, but just be aware that that is a potential problem you could run into, that I definitely ran into, and you can learn from my mistakes. You live and you learn. Speaking of learning, I definitely encountered the most problems when it came to doing this macrame piece. I have never done macrame before. I do have macrame style hangers, but I made them out of yarn and I just braided them. This one is a little bit fancier than that. I also added beads, and I ended up dyeing it kind of an ombre pattern, which is totally optional, but I ended up having to entirely redo this one. I didn't realize that the size of the cord mattered. So I did the entire thing, and because I didn't account for the fact that I was using a larger cord size, I ended up not having enough cord. and I had to redo the entire thing. And even when I did it the second time, and the one that you'll be seeing, I wish I had cut it a little bit longer. So I did 120 inches, maybe do 140, 160, just to make sure you have a ton of extra. I used 4.5 millimeter width cord. I could even go a little bit smaller. It was pretty bulky. Again, this is my first time doing macrame, so you live and you learn. But anyway, what you'll need is your macrame cord. I used a wooden hoop for the top part, and then I also used these beads, and I ended up using some dye as well, but that step is totally optional. I cut up 120, I believe. Yeah, 120 inches of macrame cord, and I did 6 pieces of the 120 inches. As I said before, you might want to do 140 just to be safe, but I used the first one to measure out the rest of the 6. Once they were cut, I pulled 1/2 through the hoop and made sure they were all centered right in the middle, and got them all nice and even before I cut 24 inches to make a knot. Again, you might as well just cut a little bit extra, learn from my mistakes. You're gonna take that smaller string and you are going to put it facing upward, make a U shape, and then take the rest of it and wrap it around. And you're wrapping it around that loop. This is going to make a little invisible knot, and you'll see. So I wrap the rest of it around the loop, there I go. And then once you reach the end, you're gonna put it through the rest of the loop, okay? And then you're gonna pull that top string, and it's gonna pull that extra underneath, and you can cut the top and the bottom. And now it has a nice invisible knot. You're then gonna group all of your string into groups of 4, and then go a few inches down. You're gonna separate 2 in the middle, and then you're gonna take your right, go underneath your left, take your left, you're gonna go under those 2 in the middle and through that loop up there, and we're making a square knot. So I'm just gonna tighten those up, and then I'm going to take my left string and go underneath the right one, and take the right one, go underneath those middle 2 and through that loop, and that is 1 complete square knot. So you have to do 2 steps for 1 knot. So that was 1 knot of 3 that I'll be making on each set of string. Again, I'm going right, underneath left, and then going under those 2 and looping back up. I was counting out loud this whole time. I kind of struggled with this. I was like, okay, this is 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B. You'll eventually get it. It definitely got easier as I went. So if you struggle a little bit like me, don't be too hard on yourself, but just make sure you're counting and you get 3 on each. So there's my 3. I'm gonna do 3 on here and then 3 on the other as well. It's also super important as you're starting the next strings to make sure they're at the same height so everything hangs evenly. So you can just kind of adjust it and then start working on your 3. Once that's done, you can grab your wooden beads if you want to add them. And here's the little hack. You can use a needle threader, put that through the bead, and then string the yarn through there, and then pull it back through the bead. And that's gonna help you get those really thick cords through that bead. I actually kind of made these beads. There was only 1 hole in them. They didn't go all the way through for whatever reason. So they were kind of hard to get on, but I think they ended up looking really good. And then you're gonna start doing square knots around. So this is gonna be 1/2 of my square knot, and then I'm going to finish it off by doing the other direction, and this will count as 1 square knot, and I'm going to do 3 underneath. So this is 1, and I'm gonna do 2 more underneath, and I'm gonna do that for the other 2 as well. Then I'm gonna go a few inches down and make a knot in each of them. You're just gonna pull it through and kind of make sure they're all at the same height and they're all looking pretty. So you can kind of adjust them a little bit. As you can see, this one needed to be a little bit higher. You can adjust them as you go. At this point, you should have 2 cords that are smaller than the others. You're gonna take those, you're gonna put those in the middle, and then you're gonna do half of the square knot, that same part where you go right, under, left, and you're only gonna do that portion of the square knot. And this is gonna result in like kind of a spiral square knot around the 2 shorter cords. And I did 12 of these per side, or just until the cords were the same length. And then you're gonna make another knot under each of these. Finally, you can go a few inches down and make some square knots with kind of however they're hanging. This is a little bit hard to describe, but whatever cords on opposite sections lie next to each other, you're gonna make square knots in. You can see how they just kind of fall next to each other, so you're making 3 square knots. And then I'm using that invisible knot that I did at the beginning. I'm doing that again, and then I just trimmed the edges. Again, I wish I had a little bit more cord, but you know, it works. Now this step is totally optional. I did do an ombre dye. I started with very, very little bit of dye in some boiling water, and I went as high as I wanted to go. Took it out, added more dye, kind of stirred it around, and then I did this, I think 3 or 4 times. So I'm dipping a little bit lower, and then I take it out, add more dye, and then just dipping the ends, and that resulted in kind of an ombre style. But here is the final result. I absolutely love how it turned out. Again, I definitely learned a thing or two while doing this. There were mistakes made, but I still think the result is awesome, and I think the added elements of the dip dye and the beads made all of the difference. Now, the next DIY I absolutely love. Now, this one is for someone who is a little bit funkier. Generally, I think a painted pot or a DIY pot is going to be a great idea for a plant lover. They can just slip their nursery pot right in there, and it's pretty affordable. I think the pot I got was about $5, and you can decorate it however you want. Now this one, I decided to get kind of funky when I decorated it, so if your friend or whoever you're giving this to is not super out there, then maybe you want to reel it back in. But if they're weird like me, and I'm gonna assume if you follow me, you might be kind of out there, and maybe you have out there friends, this will definitely be a winner. And I feel like it wasn't too difficult. Here's what I did. For this DIY, I used some irises I printed out online, a pot, and these little flat marbles, I guess. I printed out a few different sizes of the irises because I wasn't sure what would work. These smaller ones ended up working better, so I just cut those out. Added some E6000 on the back of those marbles and glued them right on. They looked so cool. I've personally never done this technique before, so at this point I wasn't sure if these were gonna survive the oven, but they ended up surviving just fine, and they had such a cool effect. So I got some Sculpey clay, warmed it up, flattened it out for a base, cut it in half, and stuck my eyeballs on there. I then took a larger piece, went above the eye, smoothed it out for an eyelid, and then took a slightly smaller piece for the underneath eyelid. And then I just kept playing around with it. I didn't have anything exactly in mind when I started. I ended up cutting these almond shapes and adding a little bit of texture with this tool that is not meant for that, but I did this with, I believe, 8 eyeballs. When I went to put them in the oven, I made sure they were a little bit arched because the pot I was gluing them on was arched, so I kind of crumpled the foil and then put them in the oven for 30 minutes at 275. Once they cooled down, I decided to paint them. This was a tough decision to make. This was the first color I did, but I ended up going a little bit lighter. You can tell I'm just carefully going on the outsides. I did leave some white in the middle, and I really tried to avoid the glass, but if you do get it on the glass, you can just get a toothpick and scrape it off. So don't stress too much about that. But this is the final color that I ended up going with because I wanted it to be slightly lighter than the pot. I then put some blue tape on the backs of each of them to help me with the placement. I didn't want to have to do any math to decide where they were going to be placed, and this allowed me to kind of move them around before I glued them permanently. I went with some E6000 and some hot glue so they wouldn't slide around as I was gluing them on and rotating it. This is one of my favorite hacks because it allows you to do it quickly, but then the E6000 makes it super permanent. This one is my personal favorite. If someone gave this to me, I would propose to them on the spot. It looks so cool in the light, and I feel like it would just be such a unique gift. I cannot express how cool this pod looks in person, and I seriously feel like it would be the coolest gift. I would be so honored if someone gave this to me, and I feel like you could even add more eyeballs to it. You can really do whatever you want, and if your friend is not super into that sort of thing, you can just paint it however you want. those are my 3 DIYs. Thank you so much for watching. Another great gift that I think is wonderful is I have an Etsy shop and I make hand-painted butterflies, moths, everything you see behind here. It's Wystry Studio on Etsy. I made it for people to display with their plants. If you're a plant lover, you might be a butterfly slash bug slash insect lover as well. So I think the paintings I make would be right up their alley. If you want to check it out, feel free to. I'll link it below. Thank you so much for watching. This video was kind of spur of the moment. I thought we were still in fall, so we were gonna do fall things, but we're swiftly transitioning to Christmas, holiday gifts, so I have a bunch more holiday gift guides, DIYs, that I'll be making in the upcoming weeks. So stay tuned for those. Make sure you follow me on TikTok, on Instagram at Wystry Studio, where I post daily updates, and feel free to give me any questions in the comments below. Thank you so much. Happy making.